Hey everyone. Okay, so this is fun. So this video was done. Some patrons were already watching it when huge news dropped on Friday that Wizards of the Coast was not deauthorizing OGL 1.0a, and the entire SRD for 5th edition had been released under a Creative Commons license. I talk a little bit about the OGL drama in this video, and I want to add that context. Now, if you're OGL'd out, I understand. I've timestamped the video so you can just jump ahead to the main video. But this result was really surprising for everyone. I mean, so we had the leak, and the open D&D movement started to demand that Wizards of the Coast not deauthorize the OGL 1.0a. Then Wizards of the Coast came back with, oh, we need to deauthorize the old OGL because of NFTs and Nazis, etc. So from this point, I would have expected one of three things to happen. I think most people expected one of three things to happen. Either Wizards of the Coast would get their way, or the 1D&D movement would get their way, or there would be some kind of compromise in the middle somewhere. I mean, one of those three things happening, as far as I was concerned, was a safe assumption. Then, just out of the blue on Friday, it turns out none of those things happened. Instead, Wizards of the Coast decided that giving OpenD&D everything they wanted wasn't enough. So, in addition to not deauthorizing OGL 1.0a, they actually threw the entire 5th edition SRD under what I understand is a particularly good Creative Commons license that's safe, tested, irrevocable, royalty-free, and completely out of their hands. Basically, making the OGL 1.0a kind of obsolete. Like, it still exists, but if a creator wants to use the SRD, the Creative Commons license is just better than the OGL 1.0a. So Wizards of the Coast gave more than was being demanded. So that happened. Now in the video you're about to see, I talk a little bit about the GSL for 4th edition. But apparently, at least according to the OGL FAQ, Wizards was at least considering putting older material under Creative Commons as well. Now, if the 4th edition SRD ends up under Creative Commons now here in 2023, that's going to be wild. I mean, I don't know if anyone is wanting to make 4th edition product, but just still, symbolically, it would be wild. You'll see why. That FAQ has been taken down, so I guess we will have to wait and see. Now, other gaming companies could put their rules under Creative Commons as well, but I wouldn't expect that. Like, Creative Commons doesn't protect your IP at all. So the ORC system neutral license, I expect will go ahead as planned for other gaming companies to use. Also, we don't know what license Wizards of the Coast is going to use for the 1D&D SRD yet. I have to think at this time, they don't even know. Whatever license they use, at least creators are going to get to choose whether to opt in or not. I mean, I would think the ideal would be for them to put that under the same Creative Commons license as the SRD 5.1, but I wouldn't be putting any bets on that. We'll have to wait and see. Anyways, after that update, on with the video. Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, a lot of YouTube channels previously devoted to D&D content are talking about shifting some or all of their content kind of away from D&D, and in some cases, this has already started. Whether they're switching over or not, everybody is talking about Pathfinder 2 right now. I've had a lot of comments after a recent video that if I wanted to do a series of videos, which would be kind of my viewers and I learning the rules of Pathfinder together, that people would be interested in seeing that. Now, if you're already subscribed to D4 Deep Dive, you'll know that Colby released an excellent two-part series kind of doing exactly that. A deep dive into the rules for Pathfinder 2 from the perspective of an optimizer for D&D just starting out with Pathfinder. It is really good. Good enough that I don't think I have anything to add. I'm just glad I didn't make that video and then have Colby come in and make me look like an idiot. I'm linking it up above. If you want the video where the D&D optimizer walks you through all the little differences in Pathfinder 2 from a beginner's point of view, I think you should absolutely check it out. I thought it was solid gold. From the horse's mouth, I can say feel free to watch at 1.5 or 2 times speed, but watch to the end, give my guy the video retention analytics. But Pathfinder content, so hot right now. And I spent almost a day writing the script for this video, then revising it, then changing what I wanted to say, and starting over. I normally do 2 kinds of videos, optimization and rules analysis. Obviously, optimization for Pathfinder 2 would be much more helpful from someone more familiar than the game than I am, and as far as rules analysis goes, I think Colby did a great job. But I decided there's something about Pathfinder 2 that I can talk about that you won't hear from anybody else. So this isn't going to be an optimization video or a rules analysis video. This is going to be more of a self-reflection video. I want to share my personal experience about how I feel about Pathfinder 2. Obviously, we can all play the same game, and even if we all have fun, none of our experiences and feelings are going to be exactly the same. We all have our own stories. This is mine. Now, just fair warning, in regards to my in-depth feelings about Pathfinder 2, it is going to take a while to get there. I'm kind of trying to tell a story here, so if you're looking for a get-to-the-point video, this isn't that video. This is obviously a departure from my normal content, but my plans going forward are to continue to do D&D content, because I still love D&D. I'm still excited to talk about it. I still want to see what that design team is going to present in the next playtest. I'm still up for all of it. I asked my viewers whether they were going to keep playing D&D, and most of you are. So if you want D&D content, be assured this is still going to be primarily a D&D channel going forward. But I'm not tone deaf in knowing that a lot of D&D players are at least curious about other options out there. And so my plan is to start to dabble in other systems, like play one-shots in them if I get a chance. So I'll play a game here and a game there as opportunity and schedule allow. And if you like this video, then let me know, because I'd be happy to make more for other systems. Not just for Pathfinder, but for other games out there. And games that are yet to come, because I'll tell you, there's a ton of games being planned and designed as we speak. However, I've been playing Pathfinder 2 recently. And part of the reason I did that was I wanted to make a video going over my thoughts about Pathfinder 2. In fact, this was before any of the current crap storm ever started. I've been asked for years about my opinions on Pathfinder 2, and I am getting tired of responding that, I read the rules when it first came out, but I've never gotten a chance to play. So when the opportunity came up to join in a game, I took that opportunity, knowing that when it was done, I could talk about it in this video. Never knowing a friggin' civil war was a couple weeks away. Now everybody is making Pathfinder content. So I figured I better stop sitting on my hands here and make the video I was planning on before it gets lost in an ocean of Pathfinder videos. Now, although I hadn't played Pathfinder 2 until very recently, I actually know quite a bit about how Pathfinder 2 came about. So I figure now's as good a time as any. So this is going to be a bit of a combination of talking about how Pathfinder 2 came about, while spinning my personal experience in along the way. Might seem a bit random, but I think you'll see the connection between Pathfinder 2's history and how it had affected my experience and feelings playing the game before this video is done. So when it comes to the history, these are the facts. I did some research for the video, and I think I've got my facts straight, but if I do discuss anything that's incorrect, please let everyone know in the comments. The other half of this video is really just my personal experience, and it will almost certainly be different than yours if you've played Pathfinder 2 yourself. And again, feel free to share your own stories below. I will read as many comments as I can. Now, unfortunately, I can't get to every comment, but I do my best to read a lot of them. So, to start, you might be wondering, especially if you've only played D&D, does Pathfinder 2 provide a similar experience to playing D&D? And in my view, the answer is a big yes. Really, really similar. And I'm not just talking about dwarves and elves and fighters and wizards and many of the same spells and the system similarities. I mean the mechanical experience. It feels like D&D, like in my gut. If I play Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, any of the editions really, it doesn't feel anything like D&D to me, even though there is a lot of overlap in the fantasy. And I'm not knocking Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It is a fun game, but it really is its own thing. You don't play WFRP and have it remind you of any other system. I mean, depending on the edition, it might not even remind you of WFRP. But playing Pathfinder 2, it feels very much like D&D to me. Though not necessarily 5th edition D&D. This kind of hit me in the gut playing Pathfinder 2. And I actually had to sort it out in my head to figure out why I was having, this deja vu playing a game I had never played before. But once I did sort it out, it kind of makes all the sense in the world. And that's where we're going to circle in that Pathfinder 2 origin story I was promising. So here's what Pathfinder 2 feels like to me. It feels a whole lot like D&D Edition 3.5. So in order to explain why, let's cover the history and development of Pathfinder 2. So here's my 3.5 Player's Handbook and DM's Guide. Now, I was looking to put a monster manual up there as well, but I only found my 3rd edition one, not my 3.5. And maybe I never bought the 3.5. Like, maybe I thought the 3rd edition was good enough, or maybe I had it and lost it at some point. I honestly don't remember, but I did play the hell out of this game. Now, some of you already know this, but 3.5 is where I started writing player guides. If you look up Tree Monk's Guide to the Milk Invoker, that was my first written guide ever. And I'll toot my own horn. For a first guide ever, I think it's pretty darn good. At the time, and it was a long time ago, I considered 3.5 to be the best role-playing game on the market. Not that I played every role-playing game, of course, but I had played a lot of them. I explored a lot of different role-playing games in my life, and not as many recently, but there was a time I probably tried 10 different games every year. But when D&D 3.5 came out, I shifted to mostly playing D&D. Now, as I said, I love the game, but I will say in the years that I played it, my feelings on it really changed. A lot of system bloat, there were imbalances and loops. It was not friendly at all to new players. Like, you would meet somebody and maybe they wanted to give D&D a try and you thought, maybe I shouldn't be introducing them to 3.5. And so when I did stop playing 3.5, I was just really happy to leave it behind. And it's safe to say I will probably never play 3.5 again. Anyway, D&D's 3.5 lead designer was Jonathan Tweet. If you love D&D 5th edition or you love Pathfinder 2, you owe a little bit of that to Jonathan Tweet. He got his start in game design as co-founder of Lion Rampant, and then was hired on by Atlas Games as a designer, and then Wizards of the Coast, where he was promoted to lead designer for 3rd edition and then for 3.5. He was laid off in 2008, and I'm not sure why, but he went to Pelgrane Press, where he was the co-lead designer of the 13th Age role-playing game. I believe more recently he's been more involved in making games and books to teach evolution to kids. One way or another, whether we look at 5th edition of D&D or Pathfinder 2nd edition, the contributions of Jonathan Tweet, they can still be felt. When Wizards of the Coast announced they would be making a new edition, Jonathan Tweet was out, and Rob Heinzu was in. Rob started as a designer for Daedalus games, then Chaosium, where he managed licenses, and then as a designer for Wizards. Then he became lead designer for 4th edition. Interestingly, he was laid off just a year after Jonathan Tweet in 2009. And again, I don't know what happened there, but he was the other co-lead designer of 13th Age. So if you don't know, 4th edition D&D was not well received for a variety of reasons. I'll tell you one of them right away, and this was a big one. It was nothing like D&D 3.5. 3rd edition D&D was very different than 2nd edition, but you could still feel those roots in the system. 4th edition was an entirely new game, with mechanics that far less resembled what we were used to, and far different than we had ever seen. It's the only edition of D&D I would say I played it, and it didn't feel like D&D to me. It wasn't like a new edition, it was like a new game. Now, I'll give some credit. 4th edition was definitely ambitious. I mean, to make a new edition of a standing game that was so wildly different, that's really bold. And I don't mean bold in a bad way, I mean it's courageous. It's not just a lot more work to basically design a new game from the bones up, but it takes guts too. Especially if that game is Dungeons and Dragons. This was a high-stakes gamble, and not one that paid off. Now, I'm not going to list the various issues that players had with 4th edition. I've actually covered that in a previous video. But one factor I think was also in play is we as human beings were naturally resistant to change. I think Wizards of the Coast underestimated that factor just completely. True story. One of the friends I roleplay with, every week for years, he went to Gen Con with his brand new 4th edition books, never opened. He sat in on his first game of 4th edition, and once the game was done, he turned to the person next to him, gave them his books, and said, "You go ahead and keep them." Then when he arrived home, he declared that if we were going to play 4th edition, fine, but he wouldn't be joining us. As it happens, the rest of our group, we had tried 4th edition while he was away, and we weren't fans either. I mean, if you sit down to play D&D, you want it to feel like you're playing D&D. I know players who remain fans of 4th edition, and honestly, if 4th edition was my first edition of D&D, I think I would have liked it a lot more. But, if you're going from 3.5 to 4th edition, it's a big, big change. So we gave up on 4th, and we went back to playing 3.5. And honestly, we were kind of disappointed we weren't going to be moving on to a fresh and new edition. But at this time, 3.5 was basically a dead game, And we were getting to the point where we were kind of mentally done with it, I think. But it was more of a case of, let's keep playing this while we take some time to decide what happens next for us. However, the reaction of players wasn't the only reason 4th edition wasn't received well. And now, we are going to get to something that is very relevant to everything that's been going on recently. So with 3rd edition, Wizards introduced the Open Gaming License, or OGL. The idea was that adventures, they're not good sellers. And why? Because only the DM usually buys them. However, an abundant source of adventures is massive to the health and longevity of a role-playing game. And the OGL let you or I or anyone else make adventures for 3rd edition D&D and later for 3.5. So then Wizards of the Coast could concentrate on the content that's sold, and their fan base basically supported the system with adventures. There were other supplements as well, but mainly adventures. OGL was working out great for Wizards of the Coast. When Wizards of the Coast announced 4th edition, they also announced that the OGL would not be updated to be compatible with 4th edition. Instead, there would be a new game license for 4th edition called the Game System License, and that would allow third parties to publish compatible product for the game. Now, let's talk about the infamous GSL for 4th edition. This is still an active license, by the way, so if for some reason you want to make and sell 4th edition product, this is the license you need to use. So you know, I have heard about this license before, but I've never read it for myself until I was planning this video. It is easily available online. I just Googled it, though the version I read was just this giant block of text, and it was hard to read. So what I did is I cut and pasted it, threw it onto a Google Doc, then I formatted it so it was easier to read, and then I read it through. So here's some of the stuff that is in the GSL. Let me know if any of it sounds familiar to you, for some reason. So, the GSL did not allow digital product to be made. It did not allow video games, did not allow character creators, didn't allow interactive software. It could be terminated without notice. Works using the GSL had to include proprietary compatibility service mark on their product, like a badge. Wizards of the Coast could terminate your individual license if they determined you had published anything under the GSL that broke their rules. And this is not a comprehensive list, but this is all stuff that is specifically listed in the license. So if Wizards of the Coast figured your content contained any of these things, they could terminate your license without notice. So here's some of the highlights. Your product had excessive violence or gore, sexual situations, sexual activity, includes real-world minorities, nationalities, social castes, religious groups, political preferences, lifestyle preferences, was harassing, was inflammatory. That's like half of it. Also, this one might sound familiar. Washington was made the exclusive jurisdiction for any legal issues with Wizards of the Coast, and anyone signing on to the GSL waived their right to trial by jury. If Wizards terminated the license, which they could do for any reason at any time with 0 days notice, they just had to post on their website that the GSL was toast. And it actually says in the GSL that they expect the third-party content creators to be checking the Wizards of the Coast website like daily to see if they had posted anything about changes to the GSL. And at that time, the licensee had to, quote, immediately cease all use of the licensed materials and will destroy all inventory and marketing materials in the licensee's possession bearing the compatibility logo. And, quote, the licensee will solely bear all costs related to carrying out this provision of the license. Wizards could choose to give you a 6-month grace period if they wanted to, but otherwise it would have to be immediate. Anyone who wanted to use the GSL had to sign an agreement to do so. Then they had to submit it to Wizards of the Coast, who had up to 14 days to reject the license after you submitted it. And there were no details on why they might reject you, so basically they could do it for any reason they wanted to. So that should all sound eerily familiar. The leaked OGL 1.1 was a lot like the GSL, maybe even a little less draconian on some of those details. Like the OGL 1.1 at least requires Wizards of the Coast to give you 30 days notice. Now, some third-party publishers actually did sign on to the GSL. I believe Green Ronin Games did and Goodman Games did, but several other major players didn't. So that was definitely a factor in Pathfinder springing up, but there was even a bigger factor. This is why we have Pathfinder. So along with the new 4th edition of D&D, Wizards of the Coast also decided they were going to stop printing Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine. Instead, they were going to bring it in-house and release online articles and adventures under those titles. This decision is why Pathfinder exists. So, Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine, you can see what they did there, were a couple of magazine titles that go way back to first edition of D&D. Basically, Dungeon Magazine included little D&D adventures you could run, and Dragon Magazine was composed of articles about role-playing in general, but really focused on D&D. Both titles were owned by Wizards of the Coast, but they didn't publish them. The publishing company they had been using since 2002 was a little publishing company called Paizo. When Dungeon and Dragon Magazine printings were canceled, there was going to be more than a year before content for the GSL for 4th edition could even be created. So now Paizo is out of a job and they can't even make 4th edition material. So now we need to talk about Jason Bullman, who is the lead designer for the Pathfinder role-playing game. So Jason Bullman had an idea, and that was that Paizo would publish their own game that would basically be the D&D 3.5 rules, except they would add material from the campaign setting of Golarion, which had already been developed through the Dungeon Magazine Adventure Pass, as well as modifications to the 3.5 rule set that Jason had already largely developed on his own in a document that he referred to as his 3.5 errata. So he went from managing editor to lead designer, and his modifications for 3.5 were released as public playtests. And here's the thing about those public playtests, is basically you could go to the Paizo website, you could download the entire rule set for free, and it was almost all Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, plus a few tweaks. This was not something you could get from Wizards of the Coast. And nothing like the 1D&D playtest where you get little bits and pieces, because they had almost all the rules already. They just have to take what Wizards of the Coast had done, tweak it up, and then release it for free. So I can just imagine Wizards of the Coast was super happy about this. But for players, it was just a fantastic way to try out this, updated game, give their feedback with the full context of the rules. That's something we can't do with 1D&D today, though I guess they maybe have a bigger job. But when the official game came out, we bought it, of course, because a number of things had been changed due to playtest feedback, and we wanted the official game. Everyone called this Pathfinder game D&D 3.75. I mean, I don't even remember calling it Pathfinder. We would call it D&D. And when I would schedule a game with friends, the email was always about playing D&D this day or that, but what we meant was Pathfinder. Now, if I was to take, say, the Pathfinder 2 rules and, tweak a few things and then release it and call it, Treant Monk's role-playing game, I would be sued to high heaven. However, there was one thing the GSL didn't include. It didn't declare the OGL deauthorized. And although the OGL was intended to create adventures for their game, using it to publish your own game that was basically a copy of D&D 3.5 was technically allowed. It was definitely unforeseen, but it was allowed. So basically, out of D&D 3.5 spawned two different games. One that was way different than any other D&D game ever, and felt way different, and another that was basically D&D patched. It was absolutely bonkers to me that the game that was basically 3.5 plus errata and a game world wasn't published by the owners of D&D, required no special agreement with Wizards of the Coast, they didn't even get royalties, and there was nothing they could do about it. What's more, although the exact sales numbers were not released, a poll of hobby stores showed Pathfinder selling better than D&D 4th edition. So not only was D&D being outsold, it was being outsold by D&D 3.75, with Wizards watching helplessly as they were being outsold by their own game. Why? Because of the OGL, a license they had created. Now, a lot of my viewers know this already, but I wasn't just out on D&D at this time. I went in hard for Pathfinder. By switching to Pathfinder, we got a game that was basically an update to the game we were playing, and we figured the changes that there were positive ones. Also, by switching to Pathfinder, we could leave all that bloat of 3.5 behind us. And we did. And this is my Pathfinder book, and I'll tell you, as I set up this shot, I lifted it up and I could almost feel it falling apart in my hand. I knew this thing front to back, and I got really active on the Paizo forums, and I noted that there was kind of this anti-optimization culture there. So I figured I was going to start some optimization for Pathfinder. I began with requests to open optimization channels in the forums, and I was told, I think by James Jacobs, who was the editor-in-chief of Paizo, that he really wasn't a fan of optimization, and he didn't want an optimization forum because he figured that would spawn a Pathfinder optimization community, but there was a general game discussion where I could post that kind of thing. So I thought, good enough. So I started going through each class and writing guides for Pathfinder, and that kind of became my primary hobby for several months. I posted optimization stuff there constantly, and an optimization community built up. I don't remember if we actually ended up with our own forum channel or not. Maybe the general channel just got hijacked by us. But I know a lot of my viewers know me from those Pathfinder class guides first and foremost. Anyways, D&D 3.75 became my game at the time. I don't remember playing much else for a few years. My favorite time playing Pathfinder was when we were using just the base rulebook and the bestiary. It felt so much like playing 3.5 before the bloat. But a lot of our frustrations with 3.5 had also been fixed. I mean, not perfect fixes, but fixed enough. Pathfinder, of course, brought its own frustrations. I remember me and my friends would jokingly call it Mathfinder because of all the fiddly little bits. So here's a whole bunch of memories kind of summed up. So we have the player. I rolled a 26 to hit. Well, that misses. Then the player. How much did I miss by? The DM says you missed by 4. Then the player would start flipping through notes and pages on their character. I've got this limited feature to get a +1, so now I need 3. Okay, more flipping. Wait, I forgot about this feature. I can get a limited number of +1s, so I'll do that. So now I need 2. Okay, more flipping. Wait, I have this for +1. So now I just need 1. Okay, flip. There's one more here. Okay, so I hit. We used to joke that you never fail a check in Pathfinder. It's just, how long is it going to take you to find the amount you need to succeed? Looking back now, it is unbelievable we put up with it. But we did, and I seem to remember we were having fun, but if you put me back in time, I'm not sure I would still find it fun today. So as I previously mentioned, Rob Heinsu, the lead designer for 4th edition, was out. Like I said, I don't know for sure why he is laid off, but considering that the D&D he designed was being outsold by the D&D they had abandoned, I have a guess. So Wizards of the Coast, who own the rights to D&D, have to do something. So they announce a 5th edition. Now we get to Jeremy Crawford. So Jeremy Crawford got to start with the Games Workshop as a designer. Yeah, that Games Workshop. Then he moved to Green Ronin Games, again as a game designer. Then he got hired on to Wizards of the Coast on the design team. But for the creation of 5th edition, he got promoted to co-lead designer along with Mike Merles. Mike Merles got himself caught up in controversy that would take its own video to explain, but here's the quick sum up. He no longer works for Wizards of the Coast, so Crawford went from co-lead designer to lead designer. And I'll say this, I like Jeremy Crawford. I think it's probably clear to my regular viewers that I do. I think he's a good guy. I just think he seems like someone I would like to have coffee with and talk about D&D. I also think he's a pretty good game designer. I've called him out several times on this channel for mistakes I think he's made. So he's definitely imperfect. I just don't think perfection is a realistic expectation. I think he's done a pretty good job overall. During the development of 5th edition, Wizards of the Coast decided turnabout is fair play, and they started public playtesting just like Paizo had done with Pathfinder. 5th edition was an entire rework. I've often described it as a mishmash of 4th edition and 3.5, taking the best features of each and dispensing with the worst. Obviously, I think they came up with a pretty darn good game. I didn't participate in the playtest myself. I didn't even read it. I figured 4th edition, it was just so bad. My expectations for 5th edition were just so low, I figured it wasn't worth checking out. Now, something I was unaware of at the time was Wizards of the Coast decided to publish the system reference document for 5th edition under the old open game license. This is something that I bet you today they highly regret. Considering what happened with Pathfinder, I actually think it's kind of baffling they did so in the first place, but I assume it was because they're just trying to distance themselves from 4th edition and the mistakes of 4th edition. My introduction to 5th edition was kind of on a whim. I was at my local game store. Those of you in Calgary, yeah, I'm talking about the Sentry Box, looking for some kind of role-playing game supplement to buy, and they had the starter set box for 5th edition on their new releases rack. This is before the Player's Handbook came out. Nothing else is really piquing my interest, so I thought, what the heck, and I bought it, and I took it home and read the rules booklet that came with it, and I don't think I've had this kind of reaction to a rule set since I first read the 3rd edition Player's Handbook. I was impressed, really impressed. No base attack bonuses, no saving throws on clash charts, no complicated attack of opportunity rules, no differentiation on attacks from a character that moves before attacking with one that doesn't. It all seemed really simplified, but the good kind of simplified. I was suddenly looking very forward to the Player's Handbook for 5th edition, and I bought it immediately when it was released. And I read it, and I spent hours talking to friends, sharing our excitement and anticipation for playing this game. My gaming group decided we would finish up any existing campaigns for Pathfinder. Then we were going to try out this new edition of D&D, and we all thought it was pretty great. And we weren't alone. D&D 5th edition largely kept the fans from 4th edition and started to draw in the Pathfinder players, of course yours truly included. I can't express how much more I was enjoying 5th edition over any other iteration of D&D I had ever played, including Pathfinder, which I've always considered to be D&D, but without the brand name. We were finishing up a campaign for Pathfinder, and I had a witch character that I really liked, but I distinctly remember that we were playing that campaign, and every other week we were playing 5th edition. And I always looked so much more forward to playing 5th edition. Pathfinder was just feeling really clunky in comparison. Then D&D started to get really popular. Critical Role, Stranger Things, new players were flocking to D&D, and because it wasn't too hard a game to learn, they were staying with D&D. D&D has never had a monopoly in the market, but they sure have had dominance in the market for several years now. Oh, I should also mention that a common sentiment online was that optimization was pointless in 5th edition. One criticism of yours truly I've seen parroted many times online is that I'm a fossil from 3.5 who doesn't recognize that optimization isn't necessary in 5th edition like it was in 3.5. I mean, there's some point there, but ouch, guys. So Paizo had to respond with a new edition of Pathfinder. Besides, from what I hear, the bloat in Pathfinder 1 was getting worse than it was in 3.5. It was announced in 2018, and again it had an open playtest. Once again, Jason Bullman was the lead designer, and the playtesters were mostly the players who had stuck with Pathfinder 1st edition. I mean, I was mildly interested, and I did put in for a pre-order of the main book. At this time, I was just kind of starting with YouTube content, but I basically figured two things about Pathfinder. Number one, I was very familiar with the 1st edition, and I figured I might still have some name recognition with the Pathfinder community. Number two, I remembered that Pathfinder 1 was bigger than 4th edition, so if Pathfinder 2 was super successful, maybe making Pathfinder 2 content was an option for me as well. Its design was largely based on feedback from those players, as well as experiences and grievances people had had with 1st edition Pathfinder. The 3-action system was the big change, but a lot of other changes dealt with issues that 1st edition Pathfinder had, and so our new edition, we have new critical hit rules, or I should just say critical rules, make the scaling of features like armor class, saving throws, into hit rolls far more standardized, lots more. I mean, watch Colby's video. I read the rulebook when I got it, and it looked okay to me. It didn't look anything like a new game entirely, like when 3.5 went to 4th edition. This felt like Pathfinder 2. And of course, Pathfinder 2 feels like D&D, because just like 5th edition, it spawns from D&D 3.5, and honestly, a far more direct route. Pathfinder 1 is Paizo's D&D 3.75 edition, so Pathfinder 2 is basically Paizo's D&D 4th edition. So I kept my eyes open for Pathfinder 2, see if there was some kind of, sales explosion, and that didn't really happen. A few people were talking about Pathfinder, but not many. I saw some testimonials of players who switched to Pathfinder 2 when it came out, then switched back to D&D, and it looked like Pathfinder 2 was going to do okay, but it wasn't going to be a competitor to 5th edition. I decided it wasn't going to be popular content for me to create, so I never really made an effort to play the game. There was another hesitation I was having. A few years ago, I was invited to play in a first edition Pathfinder game. This was somewhere around the same time Pathfinder 2 came out, and I decided to join in. It's actually on stream. You can go to, you do a search for the Goblin Cave on YouTube. I think it's probably still there. I found it shocking how my taste had changed since Pathfinder 1 was my system of choice. All the little numbers and modifiers to keep track of, the restrictions on movement, these did not seem like features to me anymore. They felt like flaws. Flaws that 5th edition had fixed. And of course, some of those fixes have imperfections of their own. I can honestly say the system we were using heavily impacted my enjoyment of playing in that campaign. My channel was really growing at the time, and I was working 2 jobs, so eventually I had to drop out, which I regretted mainly because I liked the folks I was playing with, but not so much because it would mean I'm not playing Pathfinder 1 anymore. I actually made the conscious decision at that time that if the opportunity came up to play Pathfinder 1 again, I would turn it down. But I've thought in the back of my head for the past few years that I should really give Pathfinder 2 a try. So when I got an invitation from the rules lawyer to play in a Pathfinder 2 game, I took him up on it, with the understanding I probably couldn't commit to it permanently. Again, my schedule is really tight, so it is a bit of a strain to fit in another regular game, but we agreed I would join in for session 0 and 5 games afterwards that would cover levels 1 and level 2. He asked about inviting Colby from D4 Deep Dive, so I talked to Colby, and he was excited to give Pathfinder 2 a try as well. Now, I don't know if Colby is there temporarily or if he's planning to stick with the campaign for the long term. I mean, he is playing a monk that kicks butt, so I know he's loving that. One thing I experienced that I wasn't expecting was anxiety. That was a surprise. When I start a new game, I'm used to being either excited or sometimes, regrettably, a lack of excitement. But anxiety I normally don't have. Here's the thing. The rules lawyer said that the sessions were going to be recorded and that he'd be releasing them as content on his channel. I knew this going in. And I've been on camera playing games so many times, I didn't think about it for a second before I agreed. Afterwards, though, it somehow occurred to me that, my brand is really optimization. I sell you, my viewers, that I'm a bit of an expert on it. But I don't walk into systems as an expert, especially when that system has been around for years and the average Pathfinder player is going to see me making all kinds of beginner mistakes. I wondered if that could hurt my reputation. That's not the kind of consideration I've ever had to make before. When I learn a game, it's usually around a table with friends and it's not publicly available. I'm quite glad my first year of playing D&D 5th edition isn't publicly available because my rules knowledge at that time just wasn't there. Now here I am on camera for my first session ever, and I owned exactly 1 Pathfinder book. I had read it years before. I had read nothing else, and it occurred to me, I'm going to look kind of foolish, and I wonder if playing on camera for my first time might be a huge mistake. And the other thing that was bothering me is I thought, what if I don't like Pathfinder 2? So now I'm on camera, visibly not having fun, and all these Pathfinder 2 players are going to be watching me, not sharing their love of their game, as well as seeing me screw up everything out of ignorance of the rules. I've never had to go through these kinds of feelings before for just playing a role-playing game. It's amazing how having this channel and the brand I've tried to build for myself really affected my mental state going into this. So I have to say, my excitement for Pathfinder 2 was really tempered by it being on camera. In retrospect, I maybe should have held off. I mean, especially since I got an invitation to join a Pathfinder 2 campaign from people I knew and I was comfortable with, and it wasn't going to be on camera, and this happened like a week after I had committed to the game that I'm playing in. And I had to turn it down because it just wouldn't fit in my schedule. So I played Pathfinder 2 for the first time, and the second time, and the third time, and what will eventually be the 4th and 5th time on camera for anyone to see. Now, I will say, everyone I've played with in that group has been super nice and super friendly and great to play with. And I have to say to you, Colby, thanks for joining in because having someone I already know who's already a friend playing at the same time really does make it easier. I mean, I bet a lot of you can relate to that. If you go play D&D or any other game with a new group, if you have a friend joining at the same time as you, it really makes it a lot more comfortable. So we're finally getting there. Let's talk about what it felt like for me to play the game. First off, I think I should say that I like Pathfinder 2 a lot more than I like Pathfinder 1. It's more balanced, there are fewer nonsensical rules, it's better organized, and it plays more smoothly. There was something that bothered me a bit though. I really felt deja vu that I quickly recognized. This was feeling to me like D&D 3.5. I mean, obviously, there are a ton of differences between Pathfinder 2 and D&D 3.5, but that feeling I had playing 3.5 is very similar to the feeling I had playing Pathfinder 2. That Pathfinder 2 is a more direct line to 3.5 than 5th edition really comes through in my gut. And I don't think that's just a feeling either. Like, now that I have been going through the Pathfinder 2 rule set, I've noticed way more 3.5 remnants than I see in 5th edition D&D. It's not surprising. Pathfinder 2 is an updated addition to Pathfinder 1, which was D&D 3.75. And if I am being honest, I don't think I really like that. That's not meant as a knock on the system. It's just the feeling that I get that this reminds me of a game that I discarded because it stopped being fun for me. Now, I will say I have had fun playing Pathfinder 2, but this mix of deja vu and weird personal anxieties has probably made me enjoy it less than I otherwise would have. Now, I think I'll probably try Pathfinder 2 again at some point, off camera, with people I know, and my experience might be entirely different. But I'm telling you my experience, and at this time, I can say I think Pathfinder 2 is a pretty good game, but I can't say that I like it as much as I like 5th edition, at least at this time. And I can honestly say that I really know that that is not necessarily how a lot of my audience that planned to try Pathfinder 2 wanted me to say. But I try to be as genuine as I can with you, and I do want to say that my experience is based on a lot of personal and unique stuff that probably isn't a factor for you. And I have to say that for anyone out there who wants to give Pathfinder 2 a try, I think you should. Now, I don't think I've said anything in this video that is controversial, so maybe I'll throw in something controversial before I wrap up. I know a lot of my audience want to try Pathfinder 2 because they're getting tired of 5th edition. And if that is the case, great. I think you should. But I also know a lot of my audience want to try different games than 5th edition because they don't want to support Wizards of the Coast right now. Because, Wizards of the Coast tried to shove that OGL 1.1 down the throats of third-party publishers, and they kind of did it in a dishonest way as well. And I get that. And some of you might be actively looking for different TTRPGs to play at this time. And if that's your case specifically, honestly, I might suggest looking at some other options than Pathfinder. Paizo has its own skeletons in its closet. I'll tell you something, employees do not unionize if they are treated well. Kobold Press is working on Project Black Flag. There's a ton of other games out there. There's also small content creators out there working on new systems as well. I can't speak to how good they'll be, but they're probably worth checking out. And if I get a chance, I'll check them out myself. And if I like them, I will review some options on this channel as I discover them. But if you're just looking out to branch from D&D, but you still want a game that has that D&D feel, and you're not worried about, the whole corporate nastiness thing, then I think Pathfinder 2 is a pretty good option for you. So that said, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D and Pathfinder and a lot of other role-playing games too are for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.